week 3. And the first 2 weeks we talked about the study of the man, Solomon, what his life was like, what was going on, kind of that 10,000-foot view of Solomon. And we discussed the circumstances around his birth, his childhood, his inauguration, his crowning as king. His father dies. Solomon takes care of the loose ends, of the kingdom, namely his adversaries, as well as takes care of a little bit of revenge for his dad. And now Solomon's on the throne. We talked about God's gift of wisdom. We talked about his super gift of all the things that Solomon really didn't ask for and how they're going to affect Solomon's rule. And today we're gonna just drop like rocks from 10,000 foot view. We're going to come down to ground level here. And we're going to talk about Solomon the king. And we're going to start today with a deep dive on his kingdom and how he ruled and how he managed the day-to-day workings of a kingdom like Israel. And I want to make sure everybody has a handout this morning, as there's maps in there that we're going to help us get a picture of Israel as we discuss the providers, the provisions, and the borders, and the trade routes, and the foreign policy of King Solomon this morning. So I just want to make sure, those of you watching online, if you'll email me at info@warrentonchristian.org, I can email you all of these handouts and maps and so on and so forth, because they're not going to show up on the video. So I want to start today. We're in 1 Kings chapter 4. Really, we're going to kind of start at verses 24 and 25. Actually, we're kind of doing something weird. My first little bit about the borders this morning is from down in verses 24, 25. Then we'll back up and go back up to verse 1 and deal with that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good morning, Aaron.
Good morning.
All right. Okay, so let's talk about the borders and what made up the kingdom. And you'll see that you have a map there, and on your first map it says the kingdom of Solomon, 1 Kings 1 through 11. And that's the one that goes, it's the one that goes this way. Okay. The borders of the Israelite Empire had been firmly established by David, and Solomon really did not add to them. He didn't change those borders. Now, the borders extended from the Euphrates River, which is in the north, all the way at the top, to the desert on the east and the south. And then you have, of course, the kingdom of Aram, which is modern-day Syria. And then you have the Transjordan states of Ammon, Moab, and Edom. They had all been conquered by David, and so they became what was referred to as vassal states. David conquered them, said, "You're no longer a free people. I will I'll put your own military commander, king over you, but you belong to us. You pay tribute to us." Okay? So they remained as servant states to Israel. And now there were two groups of people who retained their independence, and that was the Philistines to the south and the Phoenicians to the north. Now the Philistines to the south, if you look at your map, you'll see that is almost where the Gaza Strip is today. Okay? And then you have Phoenicia to the north. All right? They were very energetic and highly skilled people. Hiram, who was the king of Phoenicia, had been a friend to David, and he remained so to Solomon. Now, as Solomon's rule progressed, the kingdom grew rapidly as far as people within it and things like that. His wisdom was obviously not only in ruling his people, but also in managing his trade and his geographical surroundings. So if you kind of look at where Israel was and you see the rivers, the Jordan River that runs through basically from north to south through there, you realize that that's a perfect trade route. The kingdom that Solomon ruled over extended from the Mediterranean basically to the Euphrates. And during Solomon's 40-year reign, there was peace throughout the kingdom. There was no wars going on. Now, there were little, I won't even call them skirmishes. There were uprisings. There were people who were trying to do bad things in the background. But it never got out of hand. Now, Solomon controlled the commercial and the military routes to Babylon and to Assyria, which was to the east and to the west, okay? So basically, that's the routes that went this way. He not only controlled north to south, he controlled east to west because they would have to come through his territory. Thus, he commanded the trade route basically between the Euphrates and the Nile, which was north to south, and also from east to west. And a little later on in his rule, you'll see way out here in the middle of nowhere, the green and the, I don't know, what is that, mauve come together out here, is a little town called Tadmor. Okay? Solomon established Tadmor because there was a huge trade route that came through here and went on to across the desert and into the eastern provinces there. All right? He founded Tadmor in the wilderness. By doing that, he intercepted the trade that was coming between Egypt and Phoenicia and Western Asia, because the trade routes would, I don't know why they didn't make this map bigger, but what they considered to be the east over here. I'm on this map right here.
Oh, I kept thinking.
What do you mean you don't have that map?
This is the map we have.
Yeah, that's this one. What's the other map? Let me see it.
Map is,
This one doesn't have
Yeah,
that.
let me see this. Go back up to
this
this one. Okay. That is your map, and it's been cut off, and I apologize.
okay.
Hey, that's fun. So when I turned it sideways to make it bigger, it cut it off. So I apologize. I didn't look at them. I just printed them off. I'm like, I turn it the other way and print it off. So basically, your map, this mauve area, and yours, it's real pink. It says Aram.
Oh, there, that's
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
okay.
Yeah.
Good, I can read these.
I am so sorry. No wonder you guys, I got the confused look through them. Let me see. Do I have that other? Yeah, I didn't print that one out for me. So Tadmor is going to be, let me see your map. So Tadmor is going to be almost straight across from Damascus. Okay? Tadmor is out there. So basically, it's out here. Damascus sits right here where the green, the mauve, and the orange come together on mine. It sits out here. So I sure apologize for that. That's going to kind of, I will print these off at the end. I'll give you guys the right copy so you actually have that. So the trade routes, the shortest distance across the desert is way up here at the top, not down here. This desert is huge. So the trade routes would have come across here. They would have hit Tadmor, and then they came down in through Israel to Egypt. Okay? So that's why he intercepted what was called the east to west. Then he was also getting the north to south route as well. Okay? Solomon used his friendship with the Phoenicians, remember Hiram, the king of Tyre, in preparation for building the temple. And this was something that he knew he was going to do all along. In fact, his father David had kind of set that up just a little bit. So Hiram was aware that was going to be happening at some point. So let's talk about the providers. We have kind of an understanding of what the borders are. And again, I apologize for those maps not being here. I'm talking one in A's and you guys are talking 1, 2, 3s. Solomon set up his government as a totalitarian government. And you'll find this in 1 Kings chapter 4, verses 1 through 19. With him at the very top, okay? Now, he had 10 officials who made up his immediate cabinet. They were his immediate advisors. And his cabinet was made up of 3 priests, 2 secretaries, a historiographer, a commander-in-chief of the army, a general overseer of all the other officers, a privy counselor, a steward, and a tax collector. Okay? So this was his group when he wanted to talk about the kingdom and what they were going to do. These were the 10 people that he called together. And so, along with him and these 10 people, they came up with this idea that in order to get the provisions that they're going to need to keep the king and his family and his cabinet and all the families happy, Solomon divided his kingdom into 12 districts. And that should be the second map that you have, okay? In fact, it should say it right at that little top there, Solomon's administrative districts, 1 Kings chapter 4. At the very top of the blue Mediterranean Sea there, all right? So each of these colored areas with a number in it, those were the districts that had to provide for the king. And it was the responsibility of the governor in charge of that district that each district would provide provisions for the king and his court for 1 month out of the year. Now, that sounds a pretty good idea. Divide that all up. When you look at some of those are big, some of those are little. And now, it was good that Solomon set up his provisions in this manner, as it was no small task to feed and to provide the food necessary. This is what the Bible says. On a daily basis, it took 10 stall-fed cattle, 20 pasture-fed cattle, 100 sheep and goats, as well as deer, gazelles, roebucks, and choice fowl. It also took 185 bushels of fine flour and 375 bushels of meal. One day. They must have had a ginormous kitchen. I mean, think about that. I'm like, that's 30 cows that were slaughtered and butchered. Per day. So you're providing for the king, the king's family and all his wives, all his servants, the 10 and their families, the 10 people, his 10 cabinet people and all of their families and all of their servants. Yeah, it gets a little bit crazy, okay? You can see how this much food would easily keep each district hard-pressed to provide for the month. Most scholars have sat down and they figured that the provisions were enough for a household of 5,000 to 6,000 people. The kingdom was having to provide for 5,000 to 6,000 people every day. And we say, man, that's a lot.
When you think about these restaurants and, when they have busy hours, can you imagine doing that every day at that level?
It's nonstop.
Constantly?
See, my brain didn't go there. I used to do that, so I get that. My brain immediately went to, well, that's not a very big number. Not if you consider that every American owes $40,000 in taxes to pay off the debt of our country.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Joel.
I mean, if we were to bring it back down, if we were to say, okay, there's 50 states, and only 12 each year have to provide for the government. Honestly, when you look at it, and that's the picture of what you see going on there. And 5,000 to 6,000 people, that's not very much. There's 5,000 to 6,000 people that work just in one building in Washington, right? All right. That was my soapbox for the day. I'll get off of it. All right. Yeah, it is. It's kind of hard for your head to figure that out. Now, obviously, there wasn't just like the only place was the kitchen at the king's place. There's obviously he had his palace. He had a place where his wives lived. So there's kitchens all over in each of these homes. So, but here's the interesting thing. Not only did the district have to provide for the king's table, but they also had to provide for his horses and his charioteers. And the king had 1,400 chariots, which means there was at least one guy in each chariot, more than likely two, and their families, and 12,000 horses. So each district had to provide the barley and the straw to care for these animals. Does anybody here have horses? I'm just curious how much straw or barley you had to feed a horse on a daily basis. I didn't figure that out. But that would be interesting to see how much that is. So you can see, and this had to be provided for the king's table each month from each district. No matter what things were like, you still had to take care of the.
Well, they had one of these districts did it for
A month.
A year.
Right. You only had to do it for a month.
Some of these are like really dinky, like Benjamin. Some of them are larger.
Yes. Now, the good thing is that when you see some of the smaller ones like Benjamin, Benjamin is in a very fertile area. So it probably could have produced much more than what it needed because it's in a fertile area. So what they would have done is they would have said, hey, we have an excess of barley. Let's talk to the guys over in District 7, and we'll trade them some barley for some sheep or some cattle to give to the king. Exactly. So the other thing that it immediately made me think of was the Hunger Games. Each district had to provide a certain amount. You know, I mean, as I was writing this and going through this, I was like, oh yeah, it was all kind of coming back to me. Now, it's interesting that Judah, you don't see Judah on here anywhere. Judah didn't have to provide anything because Judah was part of the king's line. So they didn't have to provide nothing. They could just live. Okay? Oh, yeah. This is a different side of Solomon that you don't ever think about this part of it, you know, what was going on in that kingdom. So later on in Solomon's reign, and we've jumped basically from 1 Kings 4 to 1 Kings 9. Later on in Solomon's reign, after the temple and his palace is built, he continued a lot of building projects to include the fortification and expansion. Now, some of these were all going on at the same time, but the majority of them were done afterwards. Solomon built the wall all the way around Jerusalem, what they call the Wall of Jerusalem, the Old City. That's what Solomon did. The cities of Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer, all of which he expanded and fortified. If you look at where those cities are, Megiddo is up here where number 5 and number 4 come together. Okay? Megiddo figures prominently throughout the Bible in a number of places. That's another spot that Herod goes back to and completely rebuilds it later on. We've all heard of the Battle of Armageddon. Supposedly, some scholars will tell you that's where it's going to take place, is at Megiddo. That's what it was, the Battle of Armageddon. Okay, I don't see Hazor on here. I gotta remember where that one is. I think that one is to the south, if I remember. No, it is. So you have the Dead Sea, and then the Jordan River comes up, and Hazor is straight north above that. Let me see if it's on your other map. It's in the city of Naphtali, or in the district of Naphtali. It would have been right up in here. Hazor would be. Okay, that was another one. And then Gezer is all the way down. Gezer is straight west of Jerusalem, kind of right by the Philistia. It would have been, Gezer would be on that river, kind of where these three come together. Judah, number 2, and Philistia all come together. Okay. He also built up Lower Beth Horon, Baalath, and he founded Tadmor in the desert, which we talked about. And he built up all of his storehouse cities and his towns for his horses and his chariots. Now, his storehouse cities, he went and built these huge storage facilities in certain cities, 1 in each district, or 2 sometimes in each district, so that they could store the food so that when it was their turn, it was there and ready to go. By this time, and I think this is an interesting number, there were 550 officials supervising all of Solomon's various projects. Okay. He also had ships built at Ezion-Geber, to which he had to have Hiram provide sailors to teach his people how to sail. And Ezion-Geber is, let's see, it doesn't show on either one of your maps. Give me just a second. Man, they don't make it easy on some of these maps to find some of the Ezion-Geber. It's on the coast. Philistines.
Down by Philistia.
Yeah, it's somewhere down in that neck of the woods there. Yeah.
Right there in the yellow.
Yep, I believe so. So he has these ships built, and which they use for trading, and it's through Hiram and Hiram's people that he ends up actually being able to man these ships. And so this kind of gives us an idea of what's going on in his kingdom, how things were provided for. And so it leads right into this whole trade thing that's going on in Solomon's kingdom. His foreign policies and his trade policies relied very heavily upon securing political alliances. That's why he was marrying a lot of the women that he ended up marrying, alliances with surrounding countries and kingdoms. He demonstrated this immediately, almost immediately as he took over king when he married the daughter of the Pharaoh of Egypt. Solomon continued this policy throughout his reign. Now, Israel lay in the middle of all of the great trade routes that went from the Nile Valley in the south to the Euphrates in the north. So if you think of this area as the breadbasket that everything expanded out from, that's where all the people were pushing out from, okay? Israel and Solomon drew tolls from the caravans that passed through, as well as taxing supplies for those same caravans passing through.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Did you say that the Gaza Strip, as we know now, is right out here on the coast?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Where Philistia is.
Okay.
That actually is the Gaza Strip is right on the coast.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then the other one is I don't have a map. Man, my brain just went dead. There's the Gaza Strip, and there's another little chunk north of it. What's it called? But they're in that area where Philistia was, basically. So David conquered them and said, "You're going to be subject to me, and we'll let you guys live on this coastline." He didn't wipe them out. That's why they're still there. Okay. The people of Israel expanded their own foreign trade. As we see them, what they would do is they would go down to Egypt, who were really awesome at building chariots. They would buy their chariots down there, and then they would go up north of Phoenicia is where like southern Turkey is. It's called Cilicia. And they would grab these trained horses and bring them down, and they would put them together and make chariots with horses, right? And then they would turn around and they would sell them to the Hittites and the Syrians in the northeast. Now, in retrospect, that wasn't very smart, because it was the Hittites and the Assyrians who someday would come down and conquer them. But that's what was going on. Solomon had an incredible partnership with Hiram. He was the king of Tyre, or Phoenicia, okay? And he was able to open up a southern route through the Gulf of Aqaba down through the Red Sea in order to bring trade down through there. And it was with the help of Hiram's people who taught the Israelites to sail, and they would build these ships at the Israeli ports of Ezion-Geber. And these ships were able to transport the copper ore from Solomon's mines to all points southward. And because of their ability to go by sea, the nation of Israel was able to sail to the southern Arabian coasts and East Africa as well. And it was here along this African coast, or so it was believed, that the wealthy land of Ophir existed. Once every 3 years, the Bible says the fleet of ships would bring back cargoes of gold, silver, ivory, peacocks, and apes. Now, I ran across an interesting side note as I was doing this. I made a mention about Solomon had these ships built so that he could go down to these copper mines and bring all this copper back, right, and sell it. Did you know that those copper mines have now been reopened and are being reworked again 3,000 years later after Solomon had worked them? I'm like, that's pretty cool. Okay. In a later lesson, we're going to touch on the materials for all of the building projects that were carried out during Solomon's reign as king over Israel. And these materials figured heavily into the trade routes and into the kingdom wealth. Okay. So we see Solomon's doing all of this trading and things are happening. And then it kind of leads us right into his foreign policy. Now, most of what I'm going to talk about you'll find in 1 Kings chapter 5, verses 1 through 18. But there's also some references to it in Chronicles and in a couple other places in 1 Kings. And I apologize, I didn't get those jotted down and get them on our notes today. I'll try and have that for next week. No study of Solomon's foreign policy would be complete without a look at his closest ally and his trade partner, Hiram. Now remember, Hiram and Solomon's dad were friends. David, okay? Hiram was the king of Tyre on the Phoenician coast, and when David chose Jerusalem as his capital, actually, we can back up even sooner than that. When David had begun to invade and conquer lands, Hiram had sent envoys and said, hey, we want to be friends. Okay? We don't need no problems here. We want to be friends. And so they became friends. And then when David chose Jerusalem as his capital, Hiram was wise enough to send messengers to David along with logs of cedar and carpenters to help David build himself a palace. And those two built a great friendship. And the friendship between David and Hiram actually extended down to Solomon, as we see that as soon as Hiram heard that Solomon had been anointed king, he immediately sent envoys to Solomon because he'd always been on friendly terms with David. He didn't want any issues. He didn't want any problems, right? So Solomon has a ready-made trading partner in Hiram, the king of Tyre. And Solomon used that friendship throughout his rule to continue his building projects that he had in his mind to accomplish. Now, Solomon was well aware that the Jewish nation did not have the skills and the craftsmanship necessary to build the temple, as they had been nomads for many, many years, right? That they just wandered. They didn't have places where they could settle down and begin to learn these trades. And they lived in tents, yes. And so we actually are going to see later on in some of the building process how God was even aware of that. And God said, hey, I'm gonna have this guy come and see you because I've given him a special gift. The gift to be able to work in gold, or the gift to be able to work in copper, or the gift to be able to sew and to do these kinds of things. We'll see that a little bit later on. But basically the nation was a nation of nomads, tent people. So he instructed Hiram to have his carpenters to begin to cut timbers of cedar from Lebanon, logs, and to supply gold as well. Solomon was so set on this proposition, and I think this is interesting from a business standpoint. You know, you usually say, okay, so-and-so says, hey, I need a garage built. Okay, well, what's it going to take to build that garage? And there's some set prices, and then you say, here's my bid, and they either accept it or you dicker a little bit, right? But Solomon didn't even dicker. He was so set that he agreed to pay Hiram's men whatever wages Hiram set. Now that, just in my head, that doesn't sound very wise. Hey, you know what? We're such good friends. Just whatever. Just charge me whatever. Okay? Just doesn't sound very smart to me, but we'll see what happens. By the way, not only will I pay their wages, but I'll provide food for you, king, and for your workers. Okay? The food that Solomon supplied amounted to 125,000 bushels of wheat and 115,000 gallons of pressed oil. Now, the wheat makes sense. They could make flour, and their bread was one of their big staples, right? The 115,000 gallons of pressed olive oil, I was like, that's their fuel. That's what their lamps burned. Now remember, Solomon already had his district supplying food for the king's household, his staffs, and his horses. And now he agrees, yeah, we'll send some more food over here. Okay? Yeah, this was not a one-time shot. This was a continuing, ongoing process. You're right. That's a great point, Kendall. And so after the temple and the palace was constructed, Solomon met with Hiram to discuss, hey, I've got some additional things I need to build, some storehouses, and I got some cities I want to build up, and some walls, right? And so he meets with him to discuss these further projects, and Solomon's like, well, you know, I'll tell you what, Hiram, you've been such a good friend. I got these 20 cities over here that I'm going to give to you. They now belong to Phoenicia. They're now part of your kingdom. Okay? And so he gives them 20 cities, 20 towns in the Galilee area. And it is speculated by many that the length of time and the size of the temple and palace construction, that it may have been more than Solomon could have or wanted to pay for. So he figured that given these towns was kind of a form of payment/repayment, right? And so Hiram was fairly excited until he made a little trip out there and looked him over. And he said, the Bible says he called them, oh, this is the land of Kabul. And when you translate that phrase, it sounds very similar to, these are good for nothing. Okay? Now, after Hiram was taken care of and they finished however those negotiations went, Solomon continued to build and expand his kingdom. As I said earlier, he built the wall of Jerusalem, Hazor, Megiddo, Gezer, Lower Beth Horon, Baalath, Tadmor. He built his store cities and his ships, and that continued on. Okay? Now, one of the most well-known people to come and see Solomon, and one of the most well-known stories is the visit from the Queen of Sheba, the Queen of Sheba. You see, Solomon was not just building a kingdom, he was building an empire. And at that time, he began to be noticed all around the known world at that time. And one kingdom that was just fascinated by him, by the Jewish nation in particular, was the nation of Sheba. Now, this nation is thought to have been located, and I don't have a big enough map to show, but it was thought to have been located down here on the Arabian Peninsula, okay, at the southern entrance to the Red Sea, which today we call that Yemen, okay, and that's on the kind of on the it'd be the east coast of Africa, all right. There are other scholars who insist that Sheba was actually part of what is now modern-day Ethiopia in Africa. Either way, the Sabines, as they were known, they dealt in gold, gems, spices, and other commodities from the east and from Africa. And their commercial trading and enterprises was due to their strategic location along that southern route. In other words, you came right through their area, okay? And so Solomon was paid a visit by the Queen of Sheba, who had heard about Solomon's wisdom, and she had been sent to test his wisdom and to see about his relation to the one true God. I think it's interesting, in the Bible it says that she came with all kinds of hard riddles and questions for Solomon, but also to see about his relation to the one true God. Okay? And the queen came to see for herself what were true and to pose these questions. And it was his wisdom is what impressed the queen the most, for he answered every one of her questions correctly. Sheba was so inspired with the city, the temple, the palace, the furnishings, the food, and the servants that she actually cried out, "Praise be to the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel." And when the queen left Solomon, she left him with 4.5 tons of gold, large quantities of spices and precious stones. But she took with her all she desired and asked for. Kind of makes you think, well, if you've got all this gold and spices and precious stones, what would you have wanted? You know, something that maybe didn't grow down there. Who knows? Now, this is an interesting way to end this lesson today. The relationship between Solomon and the Queen of Sheba has always given rise to speculation, and it has actually spawned several traditional stories. Now, I never thought about this. I never looked into this before until I went through this time. But some of these tales suggest that the relationship with Solomon and Sheba was less than platonic, or less than might appear from biblical texts. In fact, in the nation of Ethiopia, it is a national legend that the Queen of Sheba bore Solomon a son. He was named Menelik I, and he settled in what was then the land of Cush and became the founder of the royal house. Okay? Interestingly enough, up until 1974, the emperor of Ethiopia bore his official title was the Lion of Judah. Okay? And his national emblem was a 6-pointed star, which corresponds to the shield of David on the Israelite flag. Hey, Becky, would you throw that slide up for me? That is the flag of the Ethiopian emperor. Look at the lion who's crowned with a cross. Okay? Now, this was current until the Ethiopian Empire was dissolute. Let's see. Dissolved. Thank you. I couldn't figure out what that word was. Dissolved in 1974. Interestingly enough, and I didn't bring a picture of the new one, but the new flag looks very similar, except that the Star of David is gone, the writing across the top is gone, and the standard that the lion has does not have the cross on it. It has a spearhead. Now, the other thing that I found very, very interesting was the king's flag looked like this, except that if you were to look at the flag and then walk around to the other side, it would have a completely different picture on the other side. On the other side was a picture of St. George slaying a dragon. Okay? I didn't dig into what that was or what because I was like, that has nothing to do really with the Jewish nation. That's more of the Catholic side of things.
Not the Star of David, all the way these 5 around.
That's the 5.
Also in the circle it has stars. Are those gone?
Oh, yeah. I did not catch that, Mary. Very good. Oh, yeah, it's a better picture up there.
And I don't know what that is at the very bottom.
That's, this is what their national flag looks like right now. Okay? They call it the pentagram star. But there's also, give me just a second here, if I can find it. Oh, that one's wrong, because that's got the wrong guy on it. I should have taken a picture of the other ones with the one that came after this. Yes, the stars were gone around the middle as well. It's actually, yeah, I don't see it. I found it real easy on my computer, but on the phone, it's a whole different ball game. So yes, all of the Star of Davids are gone on their newer flag. But I thought that was very interesting to think about that. It doesn't change anything to me. You know, I don't know if that was true, not true, doesn't make any difference in regards to Solomon. I do think it was interesting that the last emperor was Menelik IV. He was at least named what the national legend says. So I tried to think about that. I was like, well, what kind of a national legend do we have if you were to say that there's a national legend in the United States? Yeah. I couldn't think of one that I would say, oh, that's a legend, because all of it is steeped in, although legends are steeped in real facts, they just have been distorted. And Paul Bunyan, yeah, that'd be a good one. And his ox, Babe, the big blue ox, big blue ox. All right, any questions?
I just think about, like, it's not a question, but the amount of gold involved in what she gave. And then it says there in chapter 10 and verse 14 that the weight of gold that Solomon received yearly was 666 talents, which it says is 25 tons.
25 tons of gold he received on an annual basis. That's a lot of gold.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any significance to the 666?
On what?
666.
Oh, no. That's a good question. Jim wanted to know if there's any significance to the 666 talents of gold that he received. No, I don't think there's any significance to that at all. I'm sure we could probably spend a little time and make some significance out of it. I can find you something that'll match that up. But I did run across, I've got a couple of videos that in the next couple of weeks when we're talking about the building of the temple, there's a guy who works with a Christian organization that has done 3D rendering of the temple, and it is absolutely phenomenal. And one of the things that I noticed, and I'll tell you this ahead of time, one of the things that I noticed is that on his interior views, I never thought about this, on his interior views of the temple, that the walls are covered with hammered gold and everything is covered and the floor is covered, that when he does this 3D render and you're looking at the wall, you can see the reflection in the wall and on the floor and on the ceiling. And for it just having these little bitty windows at the top, which is what's described in the Bible, the amount of light that's in there, because it just bounces off of everything. That's how highly polished and how much gold there was. There was no exposed anything inside the temple in any of the 3 rooms. It was all gold.
Well, who's this deal with the imagery of the?
Oh, I don't remember.
But I mean, it's online.
Yes, it's online.
Okay.
It's online. And it's what I thought was really cool. Most people don't do this, but it was like, hey, free to use, just mention my name. I'm like, that's awesome. Well, the guy does 3D imagery basically through all of the Old Testament stuff. I mean, you can even go back to, he has 3D imagery of the tabernacle, which, by the way, I would love to do this sometime. I've got to find the dates again. I've noticed, I've gotten a couple of notices. I think it's Centralia, Missouri. There is an organization that is coming through, and they are going to set up a full-sized tabernacle. And you can do a tour through it. And there will be people, there are actors there doing, they don't actually sacrifice, but, actually give you an idea. And I thought, oh man, that would be cool. I'll see if I can find some details. I'm hoping that hasn't passed us up.
In the near future? Or
Yeah.
down the road?
Yeah, no, like in the near future.
Really?
So I've seen it twice, and I should have clicked on it and followed the links. But the video that they show, they've got a little video going of it, and I'm like, oh, that is absolutely cool, of what their rendition of this is what it would have been and the size that it would. I don't know if they go in some big field up there and set it up and that. So I'll see if I can find some more information on that. But I thought that would be kind of cool. So. Okay, that's our lesson for today. Thank you guys very much. Good stuff. We start next week talking about the temple and the building of the temple.